Alright, let's shake things up this week. Instead of talking about one book that I read, I'm going to talk about a whole stack of books that I have read a while ago and that I think would be really helpful for people to know. So, I'm starting to talk a lot about mental health on this channel. Apparently that's kind of my brand now, not surprising, but I figure I should probably talk about the books that I have read that have helped me along my journey, because I also reference them a lot when talking about other fiction books and stuff that I read. And I figure it'd be a good idea to have a video where I just talk about all of them at once, and hopefully from this you can get some recommendations of books that might help you if you're trying to learn more about trauma and how it affects your life and how you can recover from it. So hopefully this will be a good resource for people. But I should mention, when it comes to self-help and psychology books, take them with a huge grain of salt. Not all advice is going to work for every person, and there's a lot of very problematic people in the self-help community, so do your research and look into who is actually writing these books and what their qualifications are. Look at the bibliography and the sources that they use and make sure they're using good sources. Research skills are really hard to teach in a video format like this, but if you're able to kind of brush up on your research skills before going into this genre, because there's a lot of really toxic books out there. These are the ones that I've found that have helped me. They might help you or they might not. It really depends, because everybody's situation is different, everybody's brain's different. So with that out of the way, here are some books that have really helped me and might help you. First, I want to mention The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I hope I pronounced that right. I probably didn't. But that is the Trauma 101 book that pretty much is recommended to everybody who's starting to learn about that. And it's very easy to see why. It's it gives a very detailed overview of the basics of how PTSD and related conditions affect the brain, and not just the brain but also the body in very in ways that can actually be measured in labs and in doctors' offices and stuff. It really shows that the mind and the body are not two separate things, in that even if you repress something, it's going to show up in your body somewhere. Chronic pain, chronic illnesses. I mean, not all chronic pain and illnesses are caused by trauma, but it does make things worse. Which is something that was kind of surprising to learn, because I've had GI issues for a long time as a kid, and the doctors could never find anything wrong with my gut. They were just yeah, this kid has just fucked up guts, but we don't know why or how or what to do about it. And now that I have gotten away from the environments that cause me so much stress, my digestion is a lot better, and I no longer have any issues except for lactose intolerance, which is probably not trauma related and is just a thing that happens as you get older. So it was really interesting to read that and to realize that trauma is really is not just in your head. It does affect your whole body, and it should be taken seriously. And he also suggests some different resources to look into at the end of the book. With he really likes yoga and somatic experiencing, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Different things, different therapies that you might not have heard about beyond the basic kind of behavioral therapy and dialectic behavioral therapy that most therapists use because it's easier to implement. However, it can be very dry to read if you're not used to reading academic books, and some of the anecdotes that he uses can be triggering because there's this one that's kind of an explicit depiction of R-word, and there's another one about a war vet and his experiences that goes into really gruesome detail that might not be completely necessary. Like, it was written primarily with academics in mind and not necessarily trauma patients. However, it's become a very important resource for both. And he really paved the way in a lot of trauma research, especially getting it out there to the public. So I think it is an important book for everybody to read if you are able to. And continuing on from that, I consider this kind of a companion book to The Body Keeps the Score, is Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. This one is more about childhood trauma, because childhood trauma is a subset of PTSD, but it has different effects and can appear much more insidiously. Like, PTSD from a single traumatic event is it manifests differently than complex PTSD, CPTSD, which is what Pete Walker specializes in. And this is child abuse and chronic bullying, things that death by 1,000 cuts, basically, where it's little things that add up to create an environment of instability and just unsafeness for a child. And this carries with them into adulthood in various ways, and he talks about the 4 F's of the trauma response that people can exhibit, and how most people tend to exhibit all 4 traits to some degree, but people tend to lean more towards 1 or 2 of the types. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So there's fight, where you're very confrontational and defensive of yourself and can kind of act like an asshole, but it comes out of fear rather than being an asshole. And there's flight, where you kind of escape physically or mentally from the situation. Sometimes this can look like being a workaholic, or constantly going on long walks so you don't have to be at home, stuff like that. Or getting sucked into video games or books. And then freeze is when your body just kind of collapses and numbs out and dissociates. People in freeze mode kind of have a hard time doing much of anything. Then there's the fawn response, which is a relatively new concept and a little bit controversial, because people are it's basically flight, it's basically flight, it's basically freeze. But I think there's enough difference that it could be considered its own thing. Fawn is basically if you've ever seen those videos of the rescue dogs where they're just rescued and they're just meeting the person for the first time, and they kind of cower and roll on their stomachs and act extremely submissive. That's kind of what the fawn response is. So Pete Walker himself, through his own experiences, has CPTSD and describes himself as a flight fawn type. And when it comes to those 2 types, he knows a lot about how they work, and he has a lot of good advice as to what's going on inside your brain when you're in one of those modes, and what to do about it. However, he has major gaps in his knowledge when it comes to fight and freeze types. He has less optimism about their ability to recover, which is frustrating to read, because I am a freeze fawn type, and I like I spent a lot of time in freeze mode, and I managed to get out of it with the help of a therapist and with good friends and with being determined to make a better life for myself. And it's really frustrating to hear him say, oh well, yeah, these guys have pretty low chance of recovery because they don't have any motivation. Like, the motivation is there, it's just hard to access. I just feel like there's a huge gap in his knowledge with that. So take everything with a grain of salt, but especially when it comes to how he describes fight and freeze types, take those with a grain of salt, especially. However, I do think it's a great book to kind of give an overview of complex PTSD and its common symptoms that are common across all trauma response types. And he does give great general advice and insights that, like, there's a couple times reading this where I'm like, oh wait, that's a trauma response? Normal people don't do that? There was a lot of that. There was a lot of, like, interesting insight into things that I did not realize were trauma and not just either normal things or just me being a weirdo. So it's very useful for that. Waking the Tiger and Healing Trauma, both by Peter Levine, are also great for educational, and then they also start to get into more exercises that you can do. Healing Trauma is great because, well, at least my version of it came with an audio CD that you can listen to that guides you through the exercises, and a lot of them are pulled straight from Waking the Tiger. A lot of Healing Trauma is kind of pulled straight from Waking the Tiger, but it kind of focuses more on the practical, like, exercises and everything. So Peter Levine's kind of thesis is that a lot of trauma happens at the more base neurological level and not necessarily the cognitive level. So the parts of our brain that we share most in common with animals are the kind that process trauma, because trauma is ingrained in primal fear responses. And animals have kind of a cycle of fear that they can go into it and get out of it with relative ease. But with humans and the way our society works and the way we've kind of trained ourselves to repress our emotions, we can sometimes get stuck in the fear cycle and not be able to get out of it. So in Waking the Tiger, Peter Levine kind of describes how that happens and the effects it can have on your mind and body, and also how you can start to get out of it. And what I really like about his approach is that it's very, like, he calls it somatic experiencing, and it's very practical about, like, kind of getting back in touch with your body through the different exercises. Like, there's one where you kind of tap on your hands, your arms, your legs, like different parts of your body, to kind of wake up your body and to remind yourself that you have one. And I know that probably sounds very weird to some people, but, like, in my case, because I've had such issues with boundaries throughout my life, sometimes I forget that I even have a body, because I'm dissociating so hard that I feel like I'm dissolving into my surroundings, and this can make everything feel overwhelming. It's like there's no boundary between me and the outside world, or my emotions and the outside world, so everything just kind of fills up the space and kind of overwhelms me. So kind of reminding myself, like tapping my hand, be like, this is my hand, this is my arm, this is my legs, kind of is very grounding, reminds me that I have a physical body, and that makes things a lot more manageable. And I'm sure that makes sense to nobody else, but yeah, Waking the Tiger and Healing Trauma really resonated with me for that reason. There's also a lot of, like, visualization. There's a trauma first aid section in healing trauma. I forget if there's one Week in the Tiger or not. So there's it tackles it from a bunch of different angles. Some of the exercises might work better for you than others, but there's some really useful stuff in here. And some of the passages in which he describes somatic experiencing sessions with his clients are really powerful and can even help you reach insights into your own trauma responses. It's intense. I don't think it's necessarily quite as triggering as The Body Keeps the Score. It can be really great and cathartic if you're in the right headspace for it. This next book combines the somatic experiencing concept with EMDR, which is a relatively new trauma therapy. It's mentioned a couple times in The Body Keeps the Score. And it's another one that sounds crazy, but I've done it myself and it works amazingly well. EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. You work with a therapist, and the therapist kind of guides you in rhythmic back and forth eye movements, or sometimes tapping. If you're prone to seizures, then you're probably going to just tap your shoulders, alternating left and right. And in doing so and focusing in on a traumatic memory, what it does is kind of brings both hemispheres, all parts of your brain, online, so that you can view the memory more objectively and be able to bring in resources that you wouldn't be able to if you were just in a flashback. Because when you're in a flashback, your cognitive brain shuts down and it's just your amygdala and limbic system. But with EMDR, because of the eye movement or the tapping, it kind of grounds you in reality and brings your cognitive brain into it so that you're able to, the way I visualized it was I'd be in the memory and I'd see myself as a child going through something bad, and then I'd come in as my adult self and I would talk to the child, calm her down, get her out of that situation, give her the protection that she needed. And then that memory, I'd still have the memory, but after that, it wouldn't be as immediately triggering. Now, this doesn't completely get rid of, all of your ingrained fear responses related to the memory, but it does help you to not get stuck in the sinkhole of being triggered. It kind of levels out the sinkhole, so that's more like a dip in the roads, you're the kind of dip where if you go over it in a car, your stomach kind of flips, but then you're oh, okay, I'm fine. At least that's how it works for me. For some people, they've had much more extreme and for some people, they've had a much more complete healing of the trauma just from EMDR sessions. It really depends on the type of trauma and the age you were at and how the sessions go and a bunch of different factors. If it happened when you were younger, it might be harder, and if it was something that was happening continuously, with child abuse, then it's gonna take way more sessions, and you're gonna have to also combine it with talk therapy and other things. But tapping in takes some elements of EMDR, which can be really intense and really needs to be done with somebody else to help prevent any major issues. I know I got triggered and overwhelmed and had to stop one session, and it was great to have a therapist to help talk me down from that. But tapping in takes the idea of bilateral stimulation and uses it in a less intense context to help you to integrate different resources that you have in your own mind so that you can use them when you're anxious or depressed or dreading something. It's a little bit weird when you first hear about it, and I was very skeptical at first, But once you get the hang of it, you start to really like be able to recall your coping mechanisms better and to bring yourself out of flashbacks and everything a lot easier. And I forgot to mention the author's name is Laurel Parnell, and this is also a book that my therapist recommended to me, which is almost kind of what started me down this whole thing of reading psychology books, because like we really do the whole bibliotherapy thing. Like, she recommends me books, I've recommended her a few books, I introduced her to Peter Levine, and so we go a little back and forth in that, like that, and I talk about what I'm reading with her. So I do have some guidance there, so I'm not just kind of doing this all by myself. So if you do have somebody who you're able to kind of talk things out with and not just be in the echo chamber of your own mind, it can really help to make sure that you're getting the help you need from these books and finding the right resources for you. And then there is No Bad Parts by Richard C. Schwartz. This one, all of these ones I'm reading, I swear to God, they all sound insane to normal people, but there is actual science behind all of these. They're actually being used by accredited psychologists who know what they're doing. They're just new concepts that are taking a while to be accepted because the mental health industry is weird and does not always accept things in a timely manner. So, No Bad Parts introduces the internal family systems model. And I've talked about this in a previous video, but I'm going to restate it here. So, you are not a single mind. You have different parts within you that all contribute to your whole being. And sometimes those parts can be burdened by trauma and don't do the job that they're supposed to do. And these parts all kind of come together in sort of a family unit. Sometimes you can have multiple parts in multiple family units. It can get to be a complicated web, but don't worry about that. So this is not dissociative identity disorder. Everybody says that. It's not. And I have to tread very carefully here because I have no qualifications. I'm just somebody who reads too much. But what is clear from what I have read and what professionals have told me when I've asked is that there is a huge difference between internal family systems and dissociative identity disorder. They share a lot of similar traits. There are theories about that, but they are just theories, and we don't know nearly enough about either of those topics to say anything definitively. So if you have concerns about your mental health, talk to a professional, and I'll leave it at that. But everybody, regardless of their mental health status, has parts. Because as you grow up and as you experience things, you have to kind of have different personalities for different situations. You know, how you have your customer service voice and then you come home and you talk in your normal voice. That kind of thing. So everybody does have parts. And most people don't think twice about them. But if you are traumatized, then there's possible that a couple of your parts are kind of infected by that trauma, and you need to work through it and get in touch with those parts and kind of reacquaint yourself with your own mind. I'm gonna give an example from my own work. Trying to keep this vague and not give too much of my own inner state away on the internet. So I have this one inner child part that is protected by a more maternal part, but this maternal part was not great at being maternal. She was kind of running around and freaking out about everything, which was freaking the child out, even though she was trying to protect the child. So through EMDR, this is how I came to learn about internal family systems. I was able to get together with the mother and the child parts and kind of give her the confidence that she needed to handle the situation. So that was a really amazing, profound moment, and it really helped me to get confidence in myself that I have leadership skills that I didn't realize I had. So this book introduces that concept and gives you some exercises that you can do to kind of meet your parts. Although if you really want to get deep into it, I highly suggest working with a therapist who knows about it. My therapist, internal family systems, is new to her, so I haven't really done a whole lot of the deeper work. But just knowing about the concept of parts helps me to know when I am meeting a new part and how to introduce myself and learn about them, and how to handle different situations by listening to the different parts of my mind and what they're saying. So it's really fascinating, and I cannot wait to learn more. One major symptom of trauma that I have a hard time with is dissociation. It can be a vicious cycle because it kind of is a shutdown kind of situation where I just cannot do anything. I cannot absorb information, and so it's very hard for me to make any progress with anything when I'm dissociating. So the book Homecoming by Thema Bryant is a great kind of guide to slowly coming out of dissociation and kind of learning to live without it. Because due to being constantly stressed, I kind of learned to live with being constantly dissociated and disconnected from myself. And Homecoming was really helpful in kind of showing that there is a different way to live, and slowly revealing different parts of that. And through the different exercises in this book, kind of, it's a very gentle guide to it. It's not like, it's written in a very gentle, nurturing way that is really, really calming to read, but also very cathartic in a lot of ways. And I also really like that it addresses different aspects of marginalization and how they can affect your healing journey. That was extremely validating, because a lot of the books I mentioned before kind of keep things a little bit vague and don't mention things like racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, and all the isms, and how they can affect trauma. Like, they do briefly mention it, but keep things more general, and I really like that Homecoming actually addresses some of them specifically. So another one that I highly recommend. Also, Lindsay Gibson's books on emotionally immature parents are great for helping you understand toxic family dynamics, and I really like that it's called emotionally immature parents rather than abusive or toxic, because sometimes you have a parent who is genuinely trying, but their best just isn't good enough, and that can be hard to kind of come to terms with. And this book helps with that. It helps you realize that, like, sometimes parents just are not good parents for whatever reason, and it is okay to realize that you have needs that aren't met, and that you have the right to have those needs met. and recovering from emotionally immature parents in particular. I read the first one a while ago, but I forget the title of it, but I have the recovering book in front of me. So, but that one specifically goes into how to handle relationships with them as an adult, not you moved out or have some distance from them. And I found that really helpful. It has the Bill of Rights for Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. That's the name of the other book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Yeah, read it a while ago, and it was when I was at a time in my life when I couldn't process information. It was really helpful it's really helpful in teaching you how to set boundaries and teaching you your worth and how to recognize your own worth, and to kind of stop people from walking over you, especially your parents and other family members. It really helped me be more assertive in advocating for myself and my needs in a lot of contexts. And then Brené Brown is a little bit controversial, I guess. I don't know. But her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, was helpful to me in learning to kind of deconstruct my shame and where that comes from, and kind of question society's expectations rather than questioning my ability to meet society's expectations. There's a lot of toxic work culture and different things in society that breed shame and make you think that you have to be perfect in order to be successful. And it was really validating to read that, not everybody can live up to that, and we shouldn't have to, and that, being imperfect is actually a strength rather than a weakness, and it is a natural part of being human. And all that sounds really obvious, and maybe it is, but being lectured on it in the form of a book somehow helped me get it through my head. And the fact that she gave very specific examples about different situations that led to shame that resonated with me really helped. It's kind of like, hey, wait, I've been through that too. And yeah, a lot of shame is when you feel like you're the only person who deals with something. That's where a lot of shame comes from. So knowing that other people go through it really helps to break down the stigma. Connecting with people is the thing that breaks down shame, and that was really interesting and really, really insightful. So I guess kind of in the same vein as Brené Brown, this is more of a self-help than an outright psychology book, but it includes a lot of elements of psychology in it, and I don't know, this is definitely one that has helped me, but I don't know how other people would view it. It's called Grit by Angela Duckworth, and it's about persistence and perseverance and how to cultivate in yourself and your kids, and kind of showing that talent is definitely not everything, and maybe not even the most important thing when it comes to success, and that continually working at it is what separates the doers from the dreamers. And this is another thing that sounds very obvious, but giving the specific examples helps me to visualize it, because I'm a very visual person, and kind of breaking it down into its individual components helped me to very conceptualize it. And the chapter on parenting for grit actually helps me in my self-parenting journey to give myself the things that I was not given as a kid, because I was one of those gifted kids who was taught that if you're not immediately good at something, you should stop doing it before you embarrass yourself. So this book is helping me to unlearn that. So, yeah, if you are a former gifted kid, I would recommend this book, I think. And I can't not mention Marie Kondo. Marie Kondo's the best. The life-changing magic of tidying up and joy at work. And I haven't found Spark Joy yet. For some reason, every time I want to buy or read Spark Joy, I can't. But I really want to. But Marie Kondo's whole philosophy has really helped me kind of rethink how I view my worth and kind of detach it from material possessions, and has helped me to kind of visualize the life that I want and to have a better idea of what actually sparks joy for me, not just in my stuff but in my relationships and my life in general, which I'm sure a lot of people can say and have said. So, I grew up in a house that could be considered on some level on the hoarding scale. It was not great. There was so much stuff that I felt like I was drowning in it. And and combined with the abuse and emotional neglect I dealt with, it was a lot, and it left me with some very weird issues when it comes to my relationship with things. I got overly sentimental towards them and was terrified of throwing things away. So Marie Kondo's philosophy of only keep things that spark joy helped me to narrow down what I actually want out of not just my stuff but my life. Because something else I've learned while doing the KonMari method is your environment reflects your headspace and vice versa. Having an environment that I felt safe in really helped me to continue my healing journey, and then as my mental health improved, my space changed to reflect that. And it's really neat seeing how those two things bounce off of each other. So yeah, these are some books that have helped me as I am unpacking my childhood trauma and my mental health issues, and I hope some of these will help you too. If you know of any books that have helped you, let me know in the comments, and let's get a whole book recommendation thread going and see if we can help each other with our bibliotherapy.